It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on that gigantic, sharp, interactive board, I have a couple gentlemen from Alliant. And Alliant is in the cybersecurity space. They provide insurance. They help MSPs and end users themselves. But today, I want to discuss some of the concerns that I have, and I believe some of the insurance providers might have, about MSPs delivering IT services and not really being in the right position, or maybe saying things they shouldn't be saying. Could they be held liable? We all saw the big lawsuit from the MSP out in California not too long ago. So, let's start with David Finz. And David, you've been on before, and you brought a gentleman with you, CJ Dietzman, so I'll let you introduce CJ in a minute, but just give a real refresher course who you are and what Alliant is real quick.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks for having me back on the program. Great to be here. So as your viewers know, Alliant Insurance Services has been around for nearly 100 years. I haven't been there quite that long. I'm coming up on 3.5 myself. We are a full-service broker. We are licensed to do business in all 50 states. And among the many insurance products that we help place for our clients is cyber insurance. It's an important product. It's often misunderstood by businesses. One of the myths that's out there that we hope to debunk is that cyber insurance doesn't pay claims. I can attest to the fact that cyber insurance does in fact pay claims for our clients and does so every day. I've decided that it would be good to bring in CJ Dietzman here to also speak to your viewers. He is part of our risk consulting practice, which we launched just over a year ago to expand our services beyond just the insurance transaction, to really help our clients manage cyber risk more effectively through risk assessments, the use of the implementation of better security controls, tabletop exercises, incident response planning, and really identifying gaps in their information security policies. So everything that goes into helping you avoid a claim in the first place. And CJ, with that, I guess I'll turn it over to you. Tell a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you so much, David. And Ray, so thrilled to be a part of the channel and to be a part of the episode today. CJ Dietzman here, as David mentioned. I lead our cyber consulting services practice. I'm a security risk and practitioner by trade. I've been working in this realm for almost as long as David has been working. How do you like that? No, in all seriousness, you blink your eyes, 25 years goes by. I've been toiling in the realms of security, architecture, controls, investigations, audit, response, ultimately culminating in what I consider to be sort of the high point of my career, working here at Alliant with colleagues like David and others, bridging the gap between cyber insurance, broader risk management, and security. So that's a bit about my background, Ray. Just really jazzed to be here today with you.
Awesome. Well, CJ, let me just throw a question to you. So just to be clear, when you talk about helping customers, those would be end users, as far as we were concerned, plus MSPs themselves. So do you work with MSPs to help them make sure that they're abiding by the right programs and policies to keep them from being liable in case their end user has a breach, if you will?
You covered a lot of ground in that question, and my response is yes to all of the above. But let me dig in there a bit, Ray, because there's a bit to unpack. Yes, Alliant's client base, the clients that I serve together with David and our team every day, span industry sectors and industry verticals. Okay? Some of them are service providers, professional services firms. Some may be in the technology realm, other professional services as well. Now, having said that, nearly all of our clients have key third-party service providers that they partner with, that they rely upon. So oftentimes the engagements that I perform and that my team performs are related directly to service providers, their control frameworks, how they reduce the probability and the magnitude of any potential loss, how they help drive compliance for Alliant clients, okay? And I can talk about what some of those engagements are. But then in some cases, those service providers are certainly our clients. The last thing I want to say in answering your question, this whole area of third-party risk management, specifically related to managed service providers, technology service providers, and the associated dependencies from clients and organizations, it's a huge point of focus, not just from an underwriter standpoint and in an insurance carrier standpoint, but more broadly, regulators are all over this topic. And certainly, leaders within and across our client businesses are super concerned about the risks in this realm.
Do you see a lot of, when you have a client, and maybe this goes to you, David, but when a client comes in and says, we're breached, so there's a breach and they're coming to you and they want some support from you, do you use your assessment team to go back and make sure they were abiding by any of the rules, if you will? Did they deviate from regulations, if you will? How does that
Right.
work?
So when our clients have a claim, our job as the insurance broker is to make sure that the policy performs and the claim gets paid, right?
Okay.
Shocking as this may seem, sometimes insurers don't necessarily see things the same way as we do, and there may be some issues around coverage. Our job is to advocate on their behalf, try to get those issues resolved without them having to go to court or to arbitration to get what they're entitled to under the policy. So no, we're not going to go in after the fact and try to find fault with something that the insured did. Our job is to, show to the extent that the evidence bears it out that in fact they were in compliance with the requirements of the policy. And sometimes you find that insurance claims adjusters will engage in a game of gotcha. They'll focus on a question on an application. Say, are you able to restore from backups? Right?
Mhm.
The answer, the client says yes, because they're anticipating that they're able to get, the data that they have backed up and encrypted and air gapped back online. Well, what happens if the threat actor actually destroys the portal that is used to get that information out of the cloud and back onto the network, right? It doesn't mean that the answer that our client gave was untruthful. It simply means that there was a development, a contingency that nobody anticipated, and the adjuster should not be able to use that as a way of getting out of paying the claim. So, our job there is to put them in touch with qualified incident response providers. There are requirements under the policy as to whom they can use, and then to make sure that the scope of work is viewed by the adjuster as what is reasonable and necessary to respond to the incident, get them back up and running with minimal downtime and with the ability to resume operations without harm to their reputation.
Well, this goes to CJ. So if I'm a customer and I want to get cyber insurance, because there's some people are telling me to do it, so I decide to get cyber insurance. There has to be some rules, obviously. They can't. I mean, how does the insurer know that my MSP, if you will, if I'm outsourced to a third party, how do they know that MSP is doing all the right stuff?
It's an important question. And by the way, to the prior question, there is an element, I always say after the technology storm and the business disruption comes the legal storm associated with a data breach or a cyber incident, comes the claims process. And then oftentimes, and I've been directly involved in some of these follow-up matters, postmortems and investigations, where unfortunately there is some finger pointing, not just for the purpose as David was so artfully describing around an insurance claim, but for other purposes around liability, potential breach of contract, other things between a client and a service provider. It can get real nasty real quick, okay? And of course, everyone lawyers up and all of those other things. Coming back to this specific question though, first things first, the insurance carriers and underwriters certainly understand, Ray, that a business can outsource everything, really. Business process, technology, systems, controls, applications, you name it, payroll. You can't outsource the risk. You can't. It's been true for decades. And I think there's still some misunderstanding and appreciation for that. You cannot outsource all of the risk and take that off of the organization. You also cannot outsource all of the compliance matters and the governance responsibility. So having said that, coming back specifically to your question, the non-negotiables, what any carrier or underwriter is going to ask about if they know that there is significant outsourcing and third-party dependencies for any given organization or insured, they're going to want to know, number one, do you have a governance program for vendor risk management, including cyber risk? Number two, do you perform due diligence to get these third-party service providers, these MSPs, analyzed, assessed, and dare I say vetted before they're onboarded? Number three, do you have ongoing visibility, and governance? And number four, wash, rinse, repeat. It's a life cycle around third-party risk management. So if you go back decades, Ray, the answer was, well, we have legal review the master services agreement. We're good. Those days are so long gone. And good cyber risk professionals know that. Good business leaders know that. Risk managers know that. And by all means, the carriers and underwriters are well aware of that.
I love the phrase, you can't outsource the risk. So that's pretty great. I mean, that's something that really should hit home with a lot of people, make you think. But if an MSP is coming to a client and they're telling the client, hey, we do everything right, here's our statement of work, whatever it is, sign our agreement.
Yeah.
Is there a place the client could go just to kind of police the MSP? I mean, they can't police themselves, kind of thing. Hey, you told us you're great and everything, but at the end of the day, maybe it's a copier dealer friend of mine that all of a sudden thinks they're an IT services expert and a cybersecurity expert, and they're running around sharing that basically marketing strategy with an end user, and it turns out they don't know what the hell they're doing. A breach happens, all of a sudden you got lawsuits involved. So how does an end user, and do you see this, and maybe that's some of the work that you do, but do end users, how do they police their MSP, if you will?
So it's an incredibly important question. Let's get right to it. I think, Ray, first things first, the principle of trust but verify applies. Mm-hmm. You're right. In the spirit of goodwill and business communications, and let's negotiate an MSA in commercial terms, those are important things. They always will be, but that's not enough. In the era of the data breach, in the era of state attorneys general, really laser focused on doing what's right around protecting individual privacy, compliance matters facing organizations across the board in various industry verticals. I digress. Couple things. Number one, you need to get some independent, objective validation for higher risk vendors. I'll use an analogy, and you brought up an interesting one. The organization that drops off copy paper once a month to the office, I think we probably all agree as risk professionals, that vendor, that service provider, lower risk than the service provider that manages, hosts, and supports our customer information system. Mm-hmm. Another example would be the payroll service provider, financially significant material, personally identifiable information. There's a fraud risk associated with payroll, inherently higher risk than the company that cuts the grass at corporate HQ. So my, foundational and simple illustration there is actually really important because not all vendors and service providers have an equal risk profile. And therefore, we should focus and train our laser, dare I say, around risk management, validation, and assurance. I didn't say insurance, I said assurance, to get that comfort we need over the vendors that matter most. And a rookie mistake, and I just want to get this out there, Ray, I think David would agree. We too frequently do I still see individuals who will apply a lens of materiality. Well, we spend most of our money, most of our budget with this one or two or three vendors, and we ignore the others because they're de minimis. When in fact, if you instead of applied the materiality lens, you instead applied the risk lens, sensitive data, regulated information, mission critical transactions, you'd have a completely different mix of what's important and critical. And that's a long-winded way of saying we've got to focus and validate through third-party assurance, do some tire kicking. Let's look at things like, do they get a SOC 2 report? Do they have an ISO 27001 certificate? Do they follow PCI compliance standards? Whatever the relevant framework might be, or independent third-party assurance, we need to get eyes on it. And then to the extent that we've got blind spots, We need to get out there, trust but verify, do some tire kicking, maybe do some site visits to get that comfort we need.
Yeah, CJ, that's exactly the point that I was going to raise when you mentioned regulated data and risk. There are industry standards that come into play here. Some of them are not specific to a sector, excuse me, like ISO 27000 or NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Some of them are specific to an industry. So obviously for retailers, compliance with PCI data security standards. For healthcare, it's going to be HIPAA, right? And for financial services in New York State, there's a series of cybersecurity regulations known as Part 500. Other states are beginning to emulate the New York model. So if you are in the business of using IT service providers for some aspect of what you do, and frankly, who isn't, right? You want to find out what are the relevant industry standards that they need to comply with, and can they document by an independent third party that they are, in fact, in compliance? Have they gone through that assessment process? Which is actually one of the things that we help clients do, is to demonstrate their own readiness in terms of compliance with those standards. And also this goes to drafting information security policies that the service provider themselves has to comply with, acceptable use policies, bring your own device, or BYOD as it's called, right? Making sure that all of these things are written in such a way so that employees and contractors know what they are supposed to do. Because once you've documented that, once you have that down in writing, the chances that they're going to be able to comply with them go up exponentially, right? And so, again, for our clients, making sure that they are in compliance, but also making sure that the vendors that they do business with are in compliance with those standards. It doesn't guarantee they won't have an event, but it does help to minimize their liability going forward.
Do you help them with that as part of the process to sign them up for insurance?
We can. Let's say we do that for every client, right? That's where CJ's team comes in. And CJ, maybe you want to talk a little bit about our, cyber insurability.
So is CJ, really quick, I'm looking, obviously that's a fee-based assessment that you're doing on their cyber readiness or their cyber risk mitigation, or what do you call that?
So a couple things. Again, there's a bit to unpack there as well. One, as a cyber insurance broker, one of the things Alliant will do for all of our clients is to evaluate their cyber insurance readiness, to identify any significant gaps around security controls, governance, prior to taking them to market to get them the coverage they seek. Okay, that's our role as insurance broker. Now, in conducting that assessment as part of renewal or first time going to market for cyber insurance, our consulting practice, that's my team, we are available to assist our clients in addressing any of those matters requiring remediation. As David mentioned, third-party risk management is coming up a lot. Focus on critical service providers. We know the carriers are going to be looking for, and in some cases, it's enumerated on individual cyber applications, pretty much all of them that I'm familiar with. It's a point of focus. To what extent do you rely on outsourcing? Do you have third-party service provider and outsourcing governance, due diligence, all of these things? And if the client doesn't have it, Alliant's here to help. So as additional paid engagements, my team is conducting third-party cyber risk assessments. We're conducting that diligence on organizations. We're helping them develop policies, procedures, standards to stand up a governance program, not just a one and done, because that would be a bit of a minimalist approach, wouldn't it? And as things evolve, and certainly from a cyber threat standpoint and from a compliance standpoint, some of the things David mentioned, we can't stay flat-footed. So our clients need to have an ongoing, fully integrated approach to third-party risk management, including key cyber risks. And that's where my team spends quite a bit of time helping our clients stand that up, develop it, and operate it.
Well, obviously, cybersecurity, along with managed IT services, is very complex. It's not plug and play. It has to be well thought out. You have to have processes in place. You have to have the right people in place. And I think a lot of times people think, well, we'll just get insurance, and if something happens, we're covered. And I just don't think that's reality. And then the other thing that concerns me a lot is where people are marketing themselves as having capabilities that they don't really have. And if an end user engages with someone that markets themselves based on capabilities they don't have, and there's an issue, someone's going to take the heat.
Ray, that's actually a very good point, because if you are in the business of providing managed services to customers, and as a result of your failure to render those services properly, they suffer some form of loss. Either an outage on your network prevents them from being able to do business, or they've entrusted you with data and that data gets breached. You could be looking at what we call an E&O, or errors and omissions claim, for the technology services that you failed to render properly. And that is a separate type of coverage. It's often blended with a cyber insurance policy, but not all cyber insurance policies have that, right? So your listeners might find that they're presented with in a contract, right, that their customer wants to see evidence of cyber insurance coverage. Oh, we have that. Okay. Does it include what we call tech E&O, tech errors and omissions coverage? Maybe, maybe not. And so we have to look at that, because if they're representing to the clients that they have coverage to defend and settle a claim of negligence around the services they provide, they might not actually have that coverage in place. It is not a given. It's typically added to a policy either by endorsement, or there's certain markets that will include it in their base form. But your listeners should not assume that they have that coverage, even if they buy cyber insurance. And that's where a broker that knows to ask the right questions can really help.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you this, and this go to CJ, and we'll kind of wrap this up. But is there, if I'm an MSP, think about one of my friends that used to be a big print dealer. Now they're an IT services company, if you will. Do you guys do an assessment just for them, or just for that business, like an MSP? You'll come in and do an assessment, see how they would maybe, what result would they end up based on today's circumstances if there was a breach? Does that make sense?
Sure. If I'm understanding the question, and let me say this, defensible and reasonable cybersecurity. If Ray, in your situation, or the business that you described is an MSP, and they want to proactively kind of do what's right, I would claim, first things first, step 0, we need to align with general industry. I'm not even going to say best practices. We got to get to par. Here's a sports analogy. We have to get to par. And I claim what that means in the cyber risk and security realm is reasonable and defensible controls that are aligned with industry frameworks. We could talk about what some really good ones are. They're all more similar than different. Don't let anybody tell you different, by the way. There's a lot of common threads. We can talk NIST, ISO, PCI, the shared assessment, what's commonly referred to as the SIG, others. We can pull the best of. And I do this all the time for clients, right? We can assess where they're at around data protection, around logical security, around network security, vulnerability management, incident response readiness. I claim if a given service provider looks at itself and says, we've got gaps and soft spots in any of the things I just mentioned and a few others, they've got some work to do. And let's talk about the other side of the fence, Ray. I will say to you, as I would say to a friend, as I would say to any of my clients, and I know David agrees, if my client, any organization across any of the verticals that we serve here at Alliant, was looking at an MSP who had sort of wishy-washy, soft spot controls, it was kind of gray, weak responses around logical access control, data protection, incident response readiness, I wouldn't tell them to walk away from that service provider. My advice would be run.
Okay.
Or if not run, we need them to do some remediation, some baseline assessment remediation. We need them to get to par before we do business with them. Again, let's come back to it, guys. You can outsource everything but the risk. I'm not going to die on that hill as a business leader with a vendor who's really not up to par.
Well, hey, I really appreciate the time, you guys, and we need to do this again, and maybe we'll get a topic we could rifle focus on because we could talk about cybersecurity for hours. But I really, really do appreciate you all coming on, and I urge my friends out there, whether you're an MSP or whether you're hiring an MSP, that you really should have an assessment around your insurance and whether the capabilities of your providers are in line with that insurance policy. And I think that's probably good advice because you can't outsource the risk, as you both say. You guys want to end this with anything? David?
I would just say if you'd like to learn more about our service offerings in this area, you can visit our website at www.alliant.com/cyber.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be happy to put you in touch with CJ or another member of our risk consulting team.
And I'll tag you guys on the post. CJ, you got any last words?
No, listen, Ray, we're just so grateful to be a part of the show. David nailed it. And listen, folks, if you reach out to us, fair warning, you might get both David and I to talk to you. You've been warned. I'm kidding.
But you can't outsource the risk, and everybody knows this. Status quo is the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see you all tomorrow. I think we did it.